Good morning, everybody. It's Martin JavaScript Party. No ret today because my son's dog should be getting dropped off here any minute. It is 8:28 on a beautiful but crisp Tuesday morning. I think it's probably like 50 degrees Fahrenheit outside, but the humidity's not too bad. It actually feels really nice. But anyways, yeah. So here we are, and basically, I have sort of this is probably the most ambitious personal project I've ever worked on, and I spent a whole year working on a similar project that I had to abandon due to sort of bad architectural decisions, and now I'm trying to avoid that again because that was a bummer. Because by the end of that, I could build some really great visualizations, um, but the downside was that like there was so many downsides. Um, but it got to the point where there was just no undoing the downsides. So one thing you might notice about this is I actually have two visualizations, and I can have up to 16 visualizations, and that is a limitation of the browser. You can only have 16 WebGL renderers on at one time. But since I have multiple visualizations, I need to be able to delete them, and that's put me down this sort of path of like realizing that I have this huge gap in my understanding of how JavaScript works. And that's understanding how memory management works and how deletes work and all that. And I've been thinking like, why, Marty? Why don't you understand deleting things and stuff like that? And that's because it is so not relevant. It is not relevant literally 999 times out of 1,000, probably even more than that, probably more like 9,909 times out of 10,000. And on top of that, in the rare circumstances that it is relevant, it doesn't matter anyways. It's fine. It's totally fine. There are just some very, very unusual edge cases in which uh, it matters, and that unusual edge case, I believe, is any web application that you will likely want to have on for more than 2 or 3 hours, that you can't really save very well, and that you need to do some sort of activity inside of it that will take hours to do. I think that's the situation where it bites you, because what'll happen is you'll end up, and I hear people talk about what happen is it'll just crash on you at the absolute worst possible time. Uh, and I hear people complain about this about the YouTube when you're trying YouTube, especially if you're in when you're trying to upload YouTube videos and you're trying to like do editing within the browser and stuff like that. They'll say, and it's kind of crazy because they generally will chalk it up to conspiracy, like, oh, YouTube doesn't want my content out there, blah 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 blah. And maybe they're right sometimes, maybe they're not right. Maybe I'm completely wrong in this, but I have a feeling it's more that they have memory leaks in their browser application, and the memory leaks are causing the browsers to crash. Um, right when after someone works on a 2 hour video and they've been trying to do their editing within the YouTube stuff and all that, and then it just crashes. So that's what I want to try to avoid. But I didn't really realize um, how absolutely. I knew that I did not understand delete. I knew I didn't understand memory management. But now I think I do have a better understanding, or at least I have a narrative that might be right or might be wrong. But so I am going to. So I was thinking it might be kind of cool to just have a whole another web series about deleting and what deleting is and all that, and trying to get into the nitty gritty of it, which would be really good for me because it would probably help me kind of uh, make this knowledge I think I have a understanding, a working understanding of it, but I don't think I could put it into words. And until you can put it into words, um, you can't communicate your understanding. Until you can can communicate your understanding of something to somebody else so that they understand it, the knowledge is kind of useless. Beyond, it just isn't that valuable. But based on my personal experience with other languages, like I used to work in this language, or not work in that language, but when I was in college, junior college at Valencia Community College, it's a Valencia College now, I believe. But when I was there in, I want to say 1988, um, we had to work on, we had a class on computer programming, which is the reason I never became a never went into computer science, because that class was a shit show. But uh, we were working on Fortran, and the thing that was weird about Fortran was that you could actually do something. Okay, so the way it cares about space, right? So something was like in the seventh column, that meant it was supposed to be printed, or maybe an assignment or something like that, right? So you could actually do something like 1 = 5 in Fortran, and then you could say like one print 1 + 1. I remember this because of something that I saw at Boeing a few years later, and then it would print 10, right? So you could reassign the number 1 to a new value. Um, and the thing and I remember years later, or a couple, like in 1998, so like 10 years later, I was working at Boeing, and they had a flight simulator, and it was written in Fortran. And at the end of that, when the program would run, it would literally print out the values for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all those things, so that they could double check that nobody accidentally changed the value. Because it was all like it's complicated, but it was very difficult. It was very simple to accidentally reassign the number 1 to a different number, because everything was all about what column. So like assignments were like, if you want to do an assignment, you like space 7 times instead. But if you want to do a print, you space like 12 times and put value on print. And if you want to do a calculation, you 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 space like 3 times. It had a very very different scheme than like JavaScript or any modern language. Um, but so I think what happens when you do something like this, right? Like you say const a = 1. So this is my narrative. I'm making up my own narrative here. I don't really understand, but this is my working understanding. The story I've made up for myself so that I can understand, so that I can have a way to work with this stuff and understand what's going on. So if you say const a = 1, and then const b = 2, you and I believe what you've done is 4 things. You've said create a new variable, and I believe, I'm guessing that JavaScript has like a list of variables somewhere. So add a to the list of variables, and then put a 1 in a piece of memory, and then in that list of variables tie a to that piece of memory, because this is a primitive, right? Yeah, that's something I should have mentioned before. The way memory management works in JavaScript, and I'm 99.99999% sure of this, is different for primitives than it is for objects. Okay, so we're going over how primitives work. So we've created an A in our list of variables. We've set aside a piece of memory, and we put the number 1 in it, and then we told A to look at that piece of memory. I believe that's how that works. I'm not 100% sure on that, but that's what I think happens. And then we said create a number B and create a variable B and set aside a different piece of memory and put the number 1 in it. So if I were to say this, A = B, I'm saying create a piece of memory called B, and then put it in our list of variables, and then take the number 1, which is from this guy's piece of memory, and put it in B's. So we're still doing 4 things here, right? That's how primitives work, and it would be that way for strings, booleans, all that. It's just going to, both of these have different, A and B have different pieces of memory they're looking at. But if we change this to an object, right? So now we said, hey, same thing, create A and point at this. And now if we say B is equal to A, then we're saying create B and point it at the exact same piece of memory that this one is pointing at. And that's because it's not a primitive. So for primitives, it'll make a copy of everything and all that. But for not primitives, so that's arrays, objects, lists, things like that, it will create a both of these. So both of these, it'll create, B will point to the exact same thing. So at this point, like if you were to say A dot value equals 2, and then you printed out B, you would get 2. B dot value, if you printed B dot value, you'd get the number 2, not, because they both have their own thing. So in this case, you're technically doing 3 things in my story. In my narrative that I've created for myself, I don't know if this is true, but my narrative that I've created for myself, you've done 3 things at this point. You created an A, you created a B, and you created a piece of memory that has this in it. In this case, instead of 3 things, you've done 4 things. You created an A and a piece of memory, B you've created A and then you've populated a piece of memory, then you created a B and you've populated a different piece of memory. So I think that is how that works, and that's why when you say in this scenario, so in this scenario, if you were to say, and we have to make this a let in TypeScript, so that it can be, in this scenario, you could say B equals undefined. It's not going to be happy with that because, I mean, JavaScript wouldn't care about this, but TypeScript does. We have to say number or undefined. So now it's happy. We're telling it to be a number undefined. And then we say print B, it wouldn't be able to print B. If we said print A, it would print 1, which is fine, which makes sense because they both have their own piece of memory they're pointing at. So I've literally just deleted B. B does not exist anymore. And neither, let's change this to a 2. And neither does the memory 2 still exists, but it won't after the garbage collector comes and gets it because there's nothing pointing at this piece of memory. So the garbage collector can easily see that this is not being used anymore. But in this case, do this. Yeah, in this case, this piece of memory still exists, and the reason it's still, even though I set this B to undefined, it still exists because A is still pointing at it. As long as something's pointing at it, it won't delete. And that is my problem. Like in this simple example, it's pretty simple because we can see everything. But I have like animations that are running. I have all kinds of different systems throughout this entire application that are pointing at the same objects. And so what I was trying to do is delete the reference to the object, but the problem is there were other references. So as long as something has a reference to it, it's still, it won't, the garbage collector won't come and recycle that piece of memory. So basically that piece of memory ends up getting locked. And that's basically the idea of a memory leak. It'll just keep, that just sits there forever, a zombie piece of, of of memory that's of not of any use to anything. It's just sitting there with stuff in it, and that is my problem. So later on, what if I do like in this case? Let's say I, instead of A and B, I did A is equal to undefined. Like, that piece of memory is still not going to be still not going to be available because B now has a reference to it. So as long as there's a reference to it, and then a lot of those things when you're working with a framework are outside your control. You don't actually have the ability, like they're creating pieces of memory and stuff like that, and you don't necessarily have the control to actually delete it. And I think that is a challenge that Angular has. It's also a challenge that ThreeJS has. So, and I know ThreeJS gives you specific functions to say, hey, destroy this. But destroying things is very, very different in JavaScript when you're dealing with stuff. Now, in this case specifically, so why doesn't this come up and bite us, and why is this something that we don't, unless you're just really working super advanced stuff, it doesn't even matter. And the reason is because this deleted, 99 times out of 100, I think, this is the reality. So you create a variable within a function, and then that variable is gone when the function is done running. You don't have to worry about deleting. Now, I have worked in, I remember, I've heard of people working in situations where you, at the end of every function, you needed to reset all of your memory. So JavaScript doesn't make you do that, which it kind of would be nice if JavaScript would make you do it, because then stuff would break when you still needed it. So that is what I learned, or that's kind of like where I'm at with deletes now. Now, the reason I understood that, I think I understand that better, is because yesterday I realized that what we can do is go in and we can disable a piece of object. So in the scenario that we had, like this, instead of making B undefined, which we probably still do before we would make it undefined, we could do like B value. Is equal to undefined. And basically what that would do is, and it's upset because TypeScript's upset about this, because it's like, no, you didn't properly type this out. Or can I do this as I'm just curious as but I wonder if I do this. Oh, okay. I see. So yeah, so in this case I can set the value to undefined. And then I think that makes this thing useless. And so if I do find a reference to it, I could at least, well, first of all, I probably yeah, see, I'm trying to understand on the fly. So in some other system, I guess I still can't quite. Well, okay, so anything that's depending on that value to have something in it would break. So then you could write code in there that says, hey, if value is undefined, go ahead and just delete it. Now, delete my reference. I don't need a reference. I don't need that reference anymore. And now I have like some code that's handling all these little rotations and stuff like that. That code that's handling those rotations was breaking before. I think that's why I started this whole deleted equals true concept. I was just trying to get stuff working and I didn't really understand what was going on, and I didn't even have a narrative for it. But when my deleted, see, in this line of code, what I'm doing is I'm deleting my reference to it, but it still exists. So I needed to find all other references, but there's no good way to find all references. But if I were to have taken that object before, so I'm saying, hey, if this is there, and I set all of its values to undefined, then the actual renderer itself becomes useless. And once the renderer becomes useless, it should break wherever it's depending on that renderer, and in there, hopefully, I could uh, delete the reference to it at that point, and then once all the references are deleted, it's no more. Now, like I said, this thing runs, but believe the way this works, because I was trying to think through that, is it creates a function to run on the next animation frame, and request animation frame. No, animation frame. It makes a request to run on the next animation frame. Well, it could see that if whatever it's supposed to be animating doesn't exist anymore, not to make a request for the next one. Because what happens is it does the function and then it requests to run itself again on the next animation frame. So it just keeps doing that, and it could just not do that when it's done. Anyways, I do think that would be a really good, like, just general web series. Hey, this is deleting. These are all the ins and outs of deleting. I think there's two big problems with that. One is because I was strongly considering it. Well, the first problem is it sort of goes against the sort of whole idea of this original intent of this application. And the original intent of this project, and the original intent of this project was to show how real developers who really, really do code in real life, how they learn and stuff like that, and how you sort of grow as a developer. Because you will never ever get to the point where you don't need to learn the new stuff. There's always new stuff that you need to learn, and there's always old stuff that you didn't get a chance to learn before that you're going to have to understand. So this is an example of old stuff that I never got a chance to learn, and now I'm like filling in the gap. And this is how it's done. This is how actual real developers do it. Now, you have kind of, as a real developer, you have two choices, right? You could create sort of a narrative. You could then, the nice thing about the narrative, create a narrative, is that if you create a really good narrative and then you actually get access to how things really work, you can then fill in the gaps or realize how broken your narrative was. And it's a lot easier to remember how things work if you actually were wrong about how it worked, right? So you come up with the way it works, you go find out how it really works, you find out you're completely wrong. That's pretty easy to remember because you had a wrong way. The other thing is you can kind of like get a working knowledge of it, but never really learn the words for it. And that is great because that's fast. It's super, super fast. The downside of that is that no one trusts you. Everyone will think you're lying or that you're outsourcing the work or whatever. If you can't explain what you can do, I mean, it's just a very miserable place to be. And also, like young developers, like if you're like 25 and you just know how to do stuff, everyone thinks that's cute. But if you're 55 and you just know how to do stuff and you don't know how to tell people, everyone thinks that you're a monster. So you don't want to be a monster. That's no fun at all. Being a monster is no fun. So, anyways, that is that. I still have like 3 minutes. So basically, this is my delete renderer, and the renderer. Now that we have that sort of working understanding of how this works in those words, which may or may not be true, but they seem to be like useful. It seems to be a useful story. Um, Now that we have that, we know that we got our renderer by ID and we found something there. Um, so, uh, and it's kind of funny because I get my renderer and then I go check to see. Oh, so this is interesting because I get a whole renderer. Maybe I just did. Oh, okay, so I just did this. I was like, for some reason I get a whole renderer and I do this, but oh, okay, yeah. Yesterday I delete all children from the dictionary. So it doesn't say. So this is probably a bad word. Delete. Um, because well, I think it should just be. The problem is that I don't want to just. It would be very easy to say, okay, I'm going to create some sort of generic function that takes an object and just iterates over all of the attributes and just deletes them. But I don't really want to do that. I want to actually, if I go in to delete something, I want to call whatever handler it is. Okay, so we do have a thing. So let me see if I can put this into better words while we're actually looking at it. So when I delete this thing, okay, so this, so like I don't mind deleting like the height, just making that undefined. Render ID is undefined, but like this calculated values, uh, I want to put some thought into it. Like, okay, uh, is there anything that has a link, might have a reference to this that also needs to be deleted? Uh, the camera, I know for sure this has something that I need to delete, right? I know, so, and I know that there's a camera handler or a camera service, an ST camera service, so I probably need to say, hey, ST camera service, go ahead and delete this one. And then the ST camera service looks and says, hey, is anybody using this camera? I don't want to delete this if anybody else is using it. And then if somebody else is using that same exact camera, which I do think I definitely want that. I want to be able to say, hey, I have two cameras that are doing the exact same thing, but they're looking at something different. I want that. I think that will be really cool. I also want the inverse. I want a scene that has a different camera in it. So, I want to be able to look at the same scene, but from two different cameras. So I want this to be able to have the same scene as this, but I want it to be able to have a different camera it's using. So I think that's the general. And this 3 renderer, I definitely want to be able to. I know that I can't share renderers. So this one has a different renderer than this one, so just wiping out this renderer is fine. Just say, hey, delete it. I don't need to go through that. But then once I go into the camera or into the scene, I have these meshes, right? And I want the scene, when it deletes, it's going to go look to see what meshes it has, and then it's going to do the exact same thing and say, hey, mesh service, can you go ahead and delete this mesh? And it's going to be like, yeah, I'll delete it as long as nobody else is using it. So basically, I want to create my own garbage collecting scheme because I might want those meshes. Now, I don't really need to delete them, right? Like, I mean, I don't actually need to write all that now that I think about it, because if I just say delete it, JavaScript will handle whether it should actually be deleted. So I guess it makes sense for this scene to just delete its mesh properties. But before it deletes its mesh properties, it probably needs to like delete its animations. Like these animations, I think. Yeah, so it needs to delete its animation references and all that, but it doesn't really have anything else that needs to be deleted. I think that everything should, like when I do a delete at the top level, it should cascade down, and everyone should manage their deletions the way they need to, so that we don't accidentally end up just leaving some reference that it doesn't get deleted. Um, but see, that's the thing is like like for some of them, yeah. See, this gets complicated because for some of them, we actually want to disable it so that if anything is using it, like I know that this at the very top, the renderer. Once we say delete this renderer, we want this renderer deleted, and so we want to disable it completely so that nothing can use it. But for the camera, we don't. So actually, we want to disable it. We can't actually delete it. We can only disable it and then delete our reference to it. Um, but the camera, I don't want to disable it if something else is using that camera. So anyways, this is all brand new virgin territory for me. I do not understand. I mean, I have never really dealt with any of these kinds of things before. So I'm learning as I go, and that was like one of the ideas of this whole thing. I have to start work in 2 minutes. Happy coding, everybody. Have a wonderful day.